I'll say what you guys.
So any goes you want that?
Yeah, actually, you know what? I don't mind sitting with you guys. Okay, guys. Yeah, today we're gonna be. This is actually a two-part special. We're gonna be talking about the fundamentals of GTO and solvers, and then next week on Monday we're gonna be going a little bit more in depth and talk about GTO general heuristics, a little bit more in depth of how GTO thinks about hands and like why it takes certain actions and things like that. The reason I'm doing this is because recently we've had a lot of guest coaches, very good at cash games and tournaments and stuff, and then they've been using GTO to like reference how they think about making better plays, etc., how they start becoming more profitable. And so there have been some students that just don't fully understand like how to think about it, and that's where this comes in. Just to give you some background and why I know what I'm talking, know a little bit about what I'm talking about when talking about this, is that I went to VCamp. I talked to some of the pros that literally coached us there, namely Chris Brewer, Andrew Moreno, there's Sam Greenwood, and also some other guest coaches, and they also reference this stuff. That's how they get to the levels that they're playing right now, and I was fortunate enough to learn from them as a result. So
can I ask you about that?
Sure, what's up?
I'm just curious, out of all the coaches you guys did at VCamp, I know you guys had great coaches. Who was your favorite?
It was probably okay. So both Chris Brewer and Andrew Moreno, because Andrew Moreno was very he more EQ heavy, and then he understood kind of like a lot of the emotional tilt aspects, and how to navigate all those different swings in poker and things like that. Chris Brewer was just really good at like thinking about all the nuances and intricacies of like different spots. And he was able to pick up very quickly like what I was thinking about, and then like be able to kind of level me up in the way I think about that hand like right away. He just like related to me right away on what I was talking about. He knew exactly, and then he just like took it a notch up within like 3 seconds. So that's where I thought he was like the most impressive. And he's just like kind of like a nerd about it and just loves talking about all these different hands. So you can hear it in the way like he talks about GTO and stuff like that. But yeah, let's get started. So we're going to go through some of these things. What is it, and what is it based off of, Nash Equilibrium, and then how GTO works versus non-GTO players, like why you should use it. And then we'll start to look into a little bit about how solvers work and what is mixing, what does that mean in like GTO world, and then how solvers find GTO, the GTO versus exploitative, and then how you can start thinking a little bit more like a solver. And then we'll go through some examples. I'll even, at the end of it, kind of pull up my GTO wizard so we can go through some sample things on a very basic level. So if you wanted to explore that platform, explore that tool, then you can do it as well. So what is GTO? It's an abbreviation for Game Theory Optimal. And it's a default, or you can think of it as it's a baseline strategy in how you want to navigate playing poker. And oftentimes, especially when you play against new people and whatever else, you're going into the unknown. So you generally want to have a good idea of how this strategy works. So it's more of a defensive strategy instead of like an attacking strategy. Exploitative is very much like attacking the leaks and weaknesses of opponents, but GTO is just kind of like based on certain actions that your opponent does, then you can at least, and you're still unsure of like how they play, you can at least have a way to make some level of profitability. That's GTO right there. And so where does it come from? It's based on Nash Equilibrium. And this is a point where if you take two opponents, and like very simply, two opponents, and they're trying to like adapt against each other, exploit each other, you do this enough times that eventually over a number of like iterations, they can't exploit each other anymore. And that's what that balance is. That's called the Nash Equilibrium. And so if we take an example, a basic game of rock, papers, and scissors, you can think of it as if player A decides to play rock every single time, how would you guys exploit that?
Paper.
Exactly. You'd use paper every single time, you would win every single time. So then what does the guy that plays rock do? He starts to see, oh, this guy's playing paper every single time, I'm also losing, I want to win, so I'm gonna start playing scissors and then exploit that. And so there's this counter play every single time, right? And all these iterations, at some point, you don't know how to counter each other if you're starting to mix your strategy. In other words, you sometimes play rock, sometimes play paper, sometimes play scissors. Like, let's just call it a third of the time for each action, each decision. And that's how you want to think about poker in general. But the difference, it's the same as poker in that sense, but the difference now is poker has way more variables. You're playing different players, you're playing against different player profiles. Some of them are maniacs, some of them are tight players, some of them are loose, aggressive, you know, all these different player profiles. And then there's different spots, there's different hands that you can have at any given point in time. And then there's different actions that those players take. So there's a lot of variables to consider when, you know, you play against players. And this is where GTO and the solver tools come into play to help you try to navigate all those different nuanced situations. Okay. So now maybe you can sort of already deduce why GTO works against non-GTO players, but basically it's because they make pure mistakes, right? You guys have played again some cash games, some online, some live tournaments, or live tournaments, some live cash games in casinos, wherever you guys play. What are some of those mistakes or pure mistakes that GTO considers? It's like whenever you, let's say, open raise and you know they're a tight player, they're always folding on a particular spot, right? Or they're always like reacting and folding to a size that like they shouldn't be folding to, or in these cases they overfold, overcall, overbluff, whatever. These are pure mistakes, right? So this means that if someone does something in the same way in rock paper scissors, if someone does something too much and you notice that pattern, you can now exploit that way, the way they play, by doing something that counters it, so that you can, in this case, make money. Or in more like technically accurate terms, you are trying to maximize your EV. So how do solvers work? Wait, sorry, 1 second. And before we go into that, like, what are some common mistakes you guys have seen when you play against other players?
Always folding to an overpair or overcard on the flop.
On the flop? Okay. So
you got kings and an ace comes, so many bets you fold.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that happens a lot. Do you play like live usually?
What?
Live poker?
I play online, but also
Online as well.
tournament and cash.
Okay. Anyone else?
When a person never played like 5 rounds and then they all of a sudden play,
Right.
I just think they have really good cards.
Right. That's another
Yeah.
one. Anyone else? Okay, so like these are some of the things that players do, and we'll go through some more examples later of like kind of general heuristics of the average player. But the good news is
mistakes that the average players make. That's what you're asking.
Yeah, like what mistakes do they make on a 1, 2, 1, 3 table?
They call too much. They don't raise enough. They call too much.
Right. That's definitely another mistake. Yeah, you're absolutely right, Peter. Like a lot of players, they tend to call way too much pre-flop if they're getting a good price. You hear that all the time as they're talking about hand. I'm getting such a good price, like I have to call. I don't have to call, but they do that anyway. They call and then they're like, what if I hit a 2 pair? What if I hit this hand? What if I hit that hand? So like people are like kind of in a gambly like way of thinking about the game already, right? You don't want to think of it that way. You want to think about it in like a process-driven way. Like you have a certain strategy in how you want to navigate certain spots with certain hands, certain range of hands against certain players, and then kind of stick to that strategy accordingly. And GTO is saying that mathematically, if you stick to that, and then whenever you find leaks, whatever, you exploit it, you should be in the long term profitable.
So you're saying if it's like a right price, don't call?
Not necessarily. That's not what I'm saying,
No.
right? But like a lot of people, like what they do is they go into a 1-3 game. They don't think about these types of things. And then they'll see like, oh, like someone, like you're on the button, right? And somebody under the gun raises to 3 big blinds, and then you have like 3 people call, and then it folds out, and the rest folds out to you, and then you're like, oh, I'm getting such a good price. I can call 3 and win like, 20 big blinds, right? That's not how you want to think about it, because you're like thinking, oh, I pay this amount and I can just gamble and try to win, right? But you want to think about what your range of hands would do at this particular spot, what the position of under the gun player, what kind of range he has to be raising in the first place, what these players would be doing by calling every single time. Why are they calling instead of like 3-betting, raising instead, or all these other considerations.
That's a lot to think about.
It's a lot to think about. So like that's why I'm trying to break it down and go one by one on some of these things. But yes, those are some of the common things people think about, common mistakes people make rather. So before we go into any deeper into that, how do solvers work? Well, first they are tools to simulate these GTO strategies, and the idea is like, again, they go through millions of iterations where if I had pocket aces under the gun +1, or like cut off or hijack or on the button or small blind or big blind or whatever, and then I'm versing all the other combinations of hands wherever people may be, and if they call, and then flop comes a certain texture, what do you do, right? It's simulating all those different possibilities, and it's coming up with a default strategy and how you would navigate it as a baseline. And so that's why solvers like do a lot of that heavy lifting for you, so you can kind of like not have to go through millions and billions of hands yourselves, right? And figure that out. So that's why
I'm losing the battle already.
Solvers is a framework.
Ah, here we go.
solvers are tools that simulate the GTO strategy.
Okay, like a digital tool.
It is, yes. Like I'll show you the
Oh.
tools.
Yeah, like
but-
the chart.
So some of them, namely like GTO Wizards, the most common, most popular one right now, and I'll show you how that works. But yeah, but because solvers and GTO in general, that strategy is more of a defensive strategy. It's just making sure that you're making the most high EV decision as possible in a defensive way. So you're not trying to win the most money possible. That is left up to exploitative strategy. So it doesn't play like a human, obviously. It's like a robot. And it doesn't necessarily make them what we consider the most common sense plays. But what it is trying to do is trying to create what's called mixed strategies. We'll go into that in a bit. Balanced betting frequencies, balanced check frequencies, mixed sizes, they mean different things, and protection for your entire range.
So, you put solvers not trying to win the most money possible. So could we define it as like perfect defense, or is that not a good definition?
It's one of the definitions of GTO. It's like in a perfect world and against perfect non-exploitative person, in other words, GTO versus GTO, it is the perfect defense, basically. But if you compare, like the reason this exists is if you were to compare it in the real world when you play against other humans, it's like, what happens? How can you make use of this, right? Humans are imperfect. We're not as balanced as solvers and how they play GTO, so they're going to make mistakes. And so you want to figure out those patterns as soon as possible and figure out how you can exploit it. And solvers ensures that given a certain action in how that opponent that you're playing, whatever they do, you know how to exploit that. That is the key there. And that's why it's very important to understand as a baseline how GTO works. Any questions on that? Does that make sense? Okay, let's continue. So then what is mixing? Mixing is just using multiple different strategies in a given particular spot. It's like, here sometimes I'll check, sometimes I'll raise, sometimes I'll check raise, sometimes I'll just fold the spot. Those are the different lines of actions or different strategies I would take for a certain hand or a certain range of hands I would be playing in a particular spot. That's more or less what it is. And it does a few things like protect your range, keep opponents indifferent, and prevent counter strategies. So we're going to look into a very basic example. Here you have aces, and doesn't matter about position right now, but what would you do on this flop, assuming that you are the pre-flop aggressor?
I'm gonna bet.
Yeah, raise.
You're gonna bet.
Sometimes.
Okay. You're gonna raise sometimes. Okay. Anyone else?
Raise.
Raise. Okay. So all of you generally want to raise, and some have mentioned raise sometimes.
What has the other person done pre-flop?
They just called, like it's just single raise pot. You raised the pre-flop, they called, and then now you're in this spot where king 7-3 rainbow comes out, and you have aces when you do, right? So are you raising 100% of the time, or how often? What do you guys think?
I'm probably betting every time.
You're betting every time. Okay, and then
Going all in.
yourself?
More than half. I'm doing it.
More than half of the time. Okay.
It also depends on the guys behind me and whether or not they tend to, what's their behavior.
Right.
Call, raise, fold.
Right.
Like if they're tight. Anyway, carry on. You know what I mean.
Yes. Okay. So, generally, there are a few ways to think about this, but the solver would prefer to raise most of the time, about, depending on like the stack sizes and some other considerations, 65 to 80% of the time, and then would like to check this, the other remaining percentage of the time. And why does it want to check? Let's say it was 80%, you bet small, and then check, you're checking 20% of the time. Why would you check that?
So you can't be exploited.
So you can't be exploited. And this is because if the general idea is if you always bet when you have like a king on the board, or like a pocket kings, pocket aces, or pocket sevens, or whatever it is, and then by the time you get to showdown and you are showing that everyone's showing their cards, what they have, and people see you always have value, then whenever you check, they're always going to take the aggressive line and bet against you and exploit you, because they know you don't have anything. Because you always bet when you do have it, and you don't bet when you don't have it. So you need to sometimes check even with your strong hands, like overpair aces in the spot, so that your opponent has to respect your check every once in a while. So then if they check, you check, then they can't just start like going bananas and raising like crazy on the turn just because you checked, right? Because you could have aces here, you could have a set of kings here, as an example. So you have to protect your entire range. That's what it means. Okay, so, and how do solvers find that GTO spot? Well, again, it's just off iteration. The player A, you fix player A's strategy, like you fix it on a particular thing, like in terms of like rock, paper, scissors, you're just like playing rock every single time. Then player B exploits it, then you fix player B's strategy, and then player A exploits it, and then you just keep going back and forth. That's how they find it. But from a poker sense, they're just running it millions of times. I kind of jumped ahead and talked about that earlier. So eventually, like neither player can exploit each other, so you reach what GTO calls, instead of Nash Equilibrium, it's just GTO Equilibrium. So now, does this sound like real poker to you?
No.
Most people play their own cards and don't give a shit about what's going on around.
Yeah. What did you find, Oz, when you play online? Do you notice any
I
patterns?
never knew this terminology or whatever this is.
Sure.
But I would say that's kind of the way I look at it and the way I play is I'm reading other players, seeing what they're doing every hand, and I'm adjusting. I didn't know there were terms for this.
Right. And then, yes, but would you say, I agree, would you say this is how everybody plays against you in this fashion?
Online, 30% of the players. There's always
30%.
one or two people at the table who you can tell they're watching.
Right. Interesting.
I
Very
know
aware
the
of
guys who, like, they only play aces and kings and they fold everything else.
Mm.
There's a classic example of somebody who can be points.
Yes, that is a profile of player as well. They're usually called OMC, like old man coffees, which they only play the strongest hands and stuff. But
I'm not sure it's a copy thing, but yeah. I saw that today online. How's that?
But yeah, does it sound like real poker? Are two players adjusting infinitely? Definitely not, like Peter says. So GTO is definitely not real life, and this is where you can figure out how to deviate, find edges against other players, and because you just know humans are going to make mistakes, and then if you understand this, you'll be able to just like figure out how to maximize your profits against them. Solvers are trying to find the best balance of like frequencies to do of actions, sometimes check here, sometimes raise here, because it's considering so many different things. But when you think about exploitative, then you want to, because you're not playing that many hands, like ever, you generally want to go the exploitative route. If you know, for example, in the aces example that Peter was talking about, yes, you want to mix it with like some checkbacks and some raise. Most of the time you want to raise, but if let's say you're playing against somebody who you played probably like 5 hands and then they're about to get knocked out soon, you're probably not going to play against them later on. You don't really have to balance the checking raise because you're not playing that many hands against them. So usually you're going to want to take the exploitative route. You're going to want to bet. It's simplify the strategy here and just go with raising 100% of the time. That's how you want to kind of think about GTO versus exploitative. Like when do you use it, right? But if you don't know what like a player is doing, or you notice they're sticking around, or playing many different hands against, not necessarily directly against them, but sometimes they're just playing hands with other players and stuff like that, and you're observing, you're watching what they're doing, and you notice they're adapting their strategies to whoever they're playing against. Those are thinking players, and so you want to generally, when you don't know how to play against them yet, you want to use GTO and reserve default to GTO so that you can play against them and not lose too much money. But also, if you do win the hand or whatever, you won't win the most, but you'll win some amount of EV. But then when you notice that they're doing something that is a clear leak, again, a leak might be a mistake where they're opening way too wide, opening all the time at like 100% frequency as an example. They never have aces 100% of the time. They never have the strongest hands 100% of the time. So they have to have 7 deuce at some point. They have to have 8-3 at some point. So you want to exploit that by, let's say, 3-betting or like take a different line of actions to pressure them, basically, when you do have strong hands. Even maybe when you have like slightly marginal hands like Jack 10 suited, but you just know they're doing this, what you see them doing this at 100% frequency, raising all the time, you might just want to just put pressure and see how they react, right? You want to take that aggressive line. And that's where exploitative is more important, but at the same time, you won't fully understand how to play exploitatively without understanding first what GTO wants to do in those spots. That's how you understand exploitative. Any questions on that?
May want to ask, does everybody know what EV means?
Anyone know what EV means? Peter?
Just checking.
Yeah?
Us?
Anyone know? EV means expected value. It's the equivalent of, in layman terms, profit. You're trying to make the most amount of money, or in some cases, most amount of chips, most amount of expected value in any given point in time. That's your overall aim when playing poker. At any point you make a decision, you always want to maximize EV against your opponents. Okay, we're gonna go do another quick example before moving on, and it's in the 1-3 live pools. People tend to what are some other mistakes? People tend to overfold on C bets, right? Like as you said, they call a little too wide, and then like an ace 7-3 comes out, and then they overfold to c-bets way too much, right? So when you do, you bet more frequently, and then boom, you're printing, you're making money, right? But some players have noticed this and they started to adjust. So how would they adjust? What do you think?
Check raise.
Check raise is one of them.
What's a check raise? Where you check it once, and then if they check it, you raise the next one?
No,
On the same street, you're out of position, you check to the pre-flop aggressor, and then the pre-flop aggressor c-bets, or in other words, continuation bets. And then instead of just calling or folding right away, you just raise on top of that, a larger amount, and you put a certain amount of pressure on the pre-flop aggressor.
love the check.
That's a check raise.
Love the check raise.
No, check raises are very
That's
fun.
pretty money.
So yeah, you check. That's literally like term for term what it's called. Check, and then you raise, all in the same street. And streets is defined by like, there are 4 different streets. There's pre-flop, there's the flop, and there's the turn, and then the river. Those are all distinct streets. So on the flop, that street, you check, you decide to raise as the pre-flop aggressor, and then I raise on over the top. That's a check raise. Cool. So, and you can check raise. Also, some people have started to call a little bit more wide as well. They've adjusted by calling a little bit wider, just because when you start thinking like range for range instead of hand for hand, then the person that took the aggressive line pre-flop doesn't necessarily, in that board, let's say ace 7-3, doesn't always necessarily have that ace, right? Sometimes they may have like 7-8 suited, right? They have middle pair. Sometimes they could be maniacs and be doing it with deuce 3 offsuit, you know? So hands like that, and then they're c-betting their entire range, right? So that's when people notice, oh, they don't always have an ace when they're betting on this board. So opponents will start to call a little bit wider with like decent equity hands like 7-8, you know, 7-9, stuff like that in that spot, let's say. But then the counter to that is the pre-flop aggressor. We go to the turn, and then they just fire a second barrel, right? They just like go aggressive on the turn, and then most people fold out here. Most people give up here because turn and rivers, that's when the pot starts to get extremely large. So a lot of people start to get scared off to call. Sometimes you have to find yourself getting sticky, and people are bluffing with absolutely air, and you have like a middle pair, and then maybe their line, their bet sizing, whatever, doesn't make sense. So then you're just gonna want to call them down. Depends. There's a lot of nuance. Anyway, and if you play a lot of live, 1-3, there's a lot of like newer players. A lot of players don't really see this type of stuff. 2-5 plus, you're gonna start to see more seasoned players. They're gonna understand some of these basics a little bit more. Not necessarily more studied, but just they'll start to adjust a little bit more. So like as you go up in stakes, usually it gets a little bit tougher. Okay. So this part I'm gonna touch on it very briefly, but then this is gonna be actually more in depth for next Monday. But when you think about how to think like a solver, and you'll notice like a lot of these coaches, if you talk with them or even talk to us and whatever, this is how we start thinking about hands now. It's like, what does my range pre-flop in this position look like? What does my range look like on this flop texture? Do I have the nut advantage? Do I have the range advantage? And do I have like complete air? And what does my opponent's range look like as a result? And does he have a lot of strong hands on this board? Does he have air as well, or like some medium strength hands? How does that differ, right? That differs from when people are new to the game, they look at their absolute hand. They look at like, I have a7 offsuit. That they're narrowed on thinking exactly how do I play this hand and how does it connect with the board. If I don't connect, I'm not betting. If I connect, I'm betting, you know? But now you want to start thinking about a range of hands. And we'll get into the solver in a bit, and so we'll see what does that mean.
Quick question.
Sure.
Can you just explain as well what like definition nut advantage and range advantage is?
Sure. So nut advantage is if you look at the total range of hands that I could have in this position, how many of my combination of hands are like nutted hands or like some of the strongest hands, right? And range advantage is just like something similar with the example of ace-7-3. It's just like how many, in my position, I'm the pre-flop aggressor, I should have more of the ace-x type of combos, type of hands in this particular spot. The person that called might have a lot more of like the middling stuff, like 7-8 suited, 7-6 suited, whatever, on the ace-7-3 board, right? So I have a nut advantage on that board. I also have a range advantage on that board, and my opponent is more likely to have medium strength hands, weaker hands, and air as well. I have air too, actually, but I have more of the nut advantage hands and more of the range advantage hands. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll have some solver examples in a moment. So, and yeah, you're just again thinking range against range at that point. So then your goal is now in terms of like when you think about sizing is value, bluffs. Do you want to like bet for value, bet for bluffs, bet for protection or pot control? And we can also go into that a little bit more in a bit, but the sizing will apply certain types of pressure. So for just to quickly go over what that means is like, if you bet small, usually it's considered a range bet. Big, like almost a pot size bet, is usually like a polar type of bet. And when you check, we talked about this earlier, you're trying to protect your range and you're trying to like see what it develops and then kind of navigate accordingly from there. An idea of what you're trying to think about doing in terms of like value bets, bluff bets, and like those types of combos and stuff, protection, etc. It might be an example, let's say, of ace-7, ace-7 deuce. If you have aces as an example in that spot, you have the literal nuts in that spot, right? And in order to maximize your EV, your profits, it might not be the best thing for you to do to just raise at any size on that board, right? Even though you're the pre-flop aggressor, because you want to kind of, what you would say, give your opponent more rope in order to like give them a chance to hit a hand in order to have some equity on that board, to put more money on the pot so you can slow play them or extract more value essentially, right? So you might opt for a check in that spot, even though you're the pre-flop aggressor, and then ace-7-3. So let's say the next card comes like an 8, right? And then let's say your opponent was playing with 7-8. Now they've made 2 pair, right? And they think they have a strong hand, and maybe an ace-x hand could check on that flop, whatever. So they decide to lead out, right? Bet a little bit. And then since you're in position, you might consider a check raise, or you can continue to trap and then just flat that call that raise, right? And then on the river, it might be, doesn't matter, like a blank card. It could be like another deuce or a deuce or a 3. Then they're like, oh, it's a clean, innocuous card. I'll just like bet again at a bigger size because my 2 pair is probably beating all of his ace-king type of hands, right? So then or if it was a 2 specifically, ace-king type of hand, then you just call or you raise all in at that point because you have a set of aces, so you've effectively trapped and you've gotten more value. Versus a similar example where if on the flop you decide to c-bet small and they have absolutely nothing, or they know you usually have ace-x hands and they have a 7, then they just fold out, then you made no money off that hand, right? So that's an example where you want to think about like what your opponent is doing, what they could have on this board, range of hands, and what sizing you're opting for to maximize your EV. Sometimes it's the check, sometimes it's the bet small, sometimes it's the bet big right away, depends. Okay, we're gonna go into some examples, answer more questions, and then that would be it for today. But here is the solver, and we're gonna look at that kind of king 7-3 off suit hand, because we were talking about it earlier. Where was that? Hold on. what was the hand? So king 7-3, right? And then it was like button versus big blind. And the solver says like, if you had aces, right? Like what would you do? And we literally look at aces here. Button as would raise like 100% of the time, no matter what. But they wouldn't choose to go at an all-in size, right? You said, yeah, it's funny because you said you'd go all in, right? But why would you go all in if like no one's gonna ever call for that amount, right? So you want to like, again, maximize your EV, rope people in, raise at a reasonable raise. So let's say in this case it's 80 big blinds. This is a tournament, by the way. 80 big blinds, you raise at a 2.3 big blind raise, right? Then big blind would call, and you go to a flop king 7-3 rainbow, and you would have about what is it here? 6.1 big blinds in the pot. So what does big blind do? They check, okay, and then button, what do they do with aces? Here, you'll notice that aces, and again, we're simplifying, right? But around 19.7% of the time they check, and then they are betting for the remaining like 80% at all these different sizings, right? Never an all-in. Sometimes 1% of the time they're betting at a really, really large over bet size. They're betting pot 1.1% of the time. You know, betting like 2/3 of the pot, 6.5% of the time, and then you're betting a small size, 71.7% of the time. But again, a lot of people, because when you think about exploitative, most people are not, unless they're like super, super pro, like they're not really thinking about the frequency. They haven't watched you play enough hands to know if you're balancing your range and balancing your action. So you should just, if you're playing only like, if I'm only playing 5 hands against Doug, every single hand I play against him, I'm gonna play the absolute maximum exploitative strategy, right? So I would just simplify all of these bet sizes to 1, and this is the main one, so you just like say 80% of the time you're gonna bet 2 big blinds.
Maybe it's worth mentioning, those 6 boxes correspond to what's in the green box above, right?
These 6 boxes correspond to the
plus the all-in 0. Like there's 5 in that green box, but I'm just trying to say, for people who don't know what a solver looks like, they may not understand the correlation between the green box and those 6 the 5 red boxes and the green box below them.
Yeah, so like the color legend is just basically saying like the darker the green, like the bigger the bet you're going, and then the lighter green is just like a smaller bet. And then the green is just you're opting for a check, and then it might be like a blue you're opting for folds, right? So let's just say, you know, we bet 2. We check here, bet 2. Oh, and then big blind, for example, like then we have some other colors here, but this is just saying like 10-4 suited, if you somehow get here with this hand when you call, then you're just folding 36.7% of the time. So you also have this color as well. You can change the colors to however you want, but yeah.
So what are we looking at? So this whole graph is all the possible combinations.
Yes. So we'll circle back to that. I was just kind of going off a little bit of a tangent, basically. But yeah, we're reviewing the hand we talked about earlier, king 7-3, and what button would have done because it was the pre-flop aggressor. How do we know button is the pre-flop aggressor? Well, when you look at the pre-flop action here, everyone folds, and then it folds around to the button, and the button decides to raise, and then only the big blind calls, and then you get to this flop, the big blind checks, and then what does the button want to do? And it's just saying like, because you get here with aces in the same like kind of line of action and configuration, you're going to want to bet 80% of the time and check 20% of the time. Okay, now circling to your question. Button. Yes, this is the range of hands you would be opening in this position on the button. It's to say that you should be open, if everybody folds to you, and you have 80 big blinds, right? We're looking at, we're playing a tournament, you have 80 big blinds. Right now there's no ICM implications or anything like that. It's 8 players on that table. You're just playing for chips and you're trying to build up your chip stack. if everybody folds to you, low jack folds, hijack folds, cutoff folds, then button, what does it want to do with this whole range of hands? Are you folding aces? No. So you're raising, right? So you're raising, but you're not raising all in, or else you're not going to get many people that are going to call unless they somehow have kings, right? So you want to just raise. And why do you want to raise this, like generally like this size or whatever? Is because it's also part of your mixing strategy as well. You want to raise with some of your strongest hands in your range, like aces, kings, queens, jacks, tens, and ace king, ace queen suited, ace jack suited, all these hands, right? But sometimes, because you're playing so wide, you could have hands like ace five suited, 7-5 suited, and all these other things as well. So you want to mix all of your strongest hands with some of your like weaker and some of your like marginal speculative hands as well, right? I guess this might be easier. Speculative hands as well. Are you following that so far?
It's worth mentioning that 5-3 suited is a raise too, 100% of the time. Or sorry, it's a raise on 5-3 suited, great hand, especially if everybody folds to you. Like the solid red box tells you a lot.
Yes, exactly. And so the other thing to think about too, to extend that thought, is this is a general like GTO approved strategy. Now, if you take like, let's say Doug that you're playing against, he's a loose maniac, right?
Yeah.
He might open up like his range of hands that he wants to play in this particular spot button to like king deuce off and all of these like these hands right here, right? And maybe even a little bit more, some of these queen X hands here offsuits, and then play all of these suited hands here, right? That he might open his hand range this way. If they're a tighter player, taking this very same range of hands, they might tighten up and not play some of these like weaker hands over here, and then tighten up and not play some of these hands over here.
Good.
Go ahead.
So how is 5-3s a raise, but then like 6-3s isn't?
Good question.
Because and this is where we'll get into more depth like next week on like how next Monday on how like the solver thinks. But generally speaking, is that like 5-3 as a suited gapper is much easier to hit like straights. It has more equity in general as a result. 6-3 is like really wide, and there's not many like flops that come that would like give you like some weird straight. Sure, that's why you'll have maniac players that have played a bunch of different hands, and sometimes they've had like 6-3 suited or off or whatever, and they've hit a miracle straight, and then they think, oh yeah, I can play any single hand. That's how the thought process came to be in the first place, right? But remember, solver, what it does is it runs through millions and millions of scenarios, and it ultimately determines that with this stack size, with 8 players on the table, that on the button, this is the best range to raise with. That's what it's ultimately saying. As long as you understand this, then you can start to adjust based on what your opponents are doing. For example, if you notice the entire 7 players that you're playing against, they're all very, very, very tight. You actually could, and you're not necessarily a maniac or a type or a loose player, you could start opening up your range a little bit. That's how you would adjust to counter all the type players you're playing against. Something like that. Anyway, that's good? Okay. So that is range. And now when we talked about how you have to think about what your range is on this board, right? You also have to think about what the opponent's range is on this board as well. So if button raises here with this particular range of hands, at the same configuration of 80 big blinds, 8 players, whatever, what is big blind, playing with? Well, they are basically calling, or at least playing, with 80% of hands, okay? And they're folding out like the other 20.9% of hands, 21%, let's just say, right? And why are they doing that? Well, because like it's just heads up. And so they have enough big blinds to not get lose all their chips and lose their tournament life. So they can play a pretty wide range. Also, if they know that the button is playing a very wide range, they can also, as a result, play a wider range as well. So they could be Okay, before I yeah, so they could be calling with all of these different hands. They could be like all the suited hands, try to make flush draws and whatever, and then they'll probably fold out a lot of these massive offsuit like gappers, and a lot of these that have very low equity, even as a high card. So, but obviously you're never folding any pairs, and then you're definitely raising the strongest hands, and you're also raising some of these like marginal middling hands as
Look
well.
at 5-4 suited too. That's only based on a gut shot if you're doing that, right?
Yeah, 5-4 suited.
You're raising with 5-4.
This is pre-flop. This is still pre-flop.
Yeah, this is still pre-flop.
Oh, it is?
Yeah. So
No,
this
aren't you after that? Okay.
no. We're
Okay,
still
I'm sorry, right.
what would they
You're
call
absolutely right,
it?
I made a mistake. Yeah.
And then the flop, we'll look at it in a moment.
Right,
But the
right.
flop comes here. King
Okay.
7-3 off, right? So now
Here we go.
big blind checks here. Now you'll notice that why are all of these like blacked out, right? And it's because you should, like big blind should not be showing up with any of these hands as a call. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And it's because like in the pre-flop, big blind wants to be 3-betting pre-flop with those types of hands, right? So if it shows up with these hands, they consider it a mistake by default. But I mean, some players want to get tricky, they could do that, whatever, so they do. But for the most part, it's not solved in this way because you technically should not be doing it. That's what it's saying. But anyway, so yeah, what happens here? Well, basically, if you simplify, you are checking out of position 100% of your entire range. It doesn't matter if you hit a 2-pair here, like King 7, or like King 3, or even like 7-3, right? You're not betting. And that's actually a common mistake that a lot of people make, which is like, as soon as they hit a 2-pair, they're scared of not getting any value, and then they start like leading out all of a sudden. But the solver prefers to check 100% of the range no matter what you have. Because if you have absolute air, you're gonna check, you should be checking. And if you have absolute value, you should be checking, so that, again, this tells the pre-flop aggressor, who you're heads up against, that just because you check doesn't necessarily mean you don't have good hands. You want to mix in all your strong hands with all of your weak hands. So yeah, you check 100% of the combos, and then what does button want to do? Well, it wants to bet basically what's called a range bet, right? In its entire range of hands, it wants to be betting most of the time. Again, 80% of the time, right? And with like aces, like how big do you want to bet? Yes, you want to be betting like, a small range bet, two big blinds, like 66, 70% of the time. And you'll notice too that the hand combination you have also changes like kind of the percentage of times you want to be betting. And does anybody know why that is?
Sorry, say that again?
Like depending on what combination of aces you have,
Oh,
it changes as well. Like, of
Sure.
course you want to play the more exploitative strategy and just like simplify, but what I'm talking about here is more, if we are to kind of look at the nuance, why do you think it has like these 2% differences and stuff
flush
like that?
possibilities, but not aces though. No, it won't be flush.
So,
It changes your opponent's range.
Yeah, it's your, okay.
yes, it
Right.
changes.
You're blocking.
Changes your opponent's range. You could be blocking because you would be holding the ace of spades, and you would be blocking the nut flush draws that would run out spade, for example. So this is where like the solver is very, very helpful for you to understand, like based on the combination of hands, it does also change like how you want to play it as well. Anyway, so button wants to like range bet, like again 70 range bet small, like let's just simplify, like 80% of the time. So we'll choose this small bet size, right? So let's do that. So then what is big blind's calling or check raising or folding like range? What does that look like at that point? Well, This is where you can mix in like check raises with the 2 pairs. You know, these 2 pairs, this is a weaker 2 pair, so it mixes some calls with some check raising as well, and you'll notice like the frequency in which you want to do it. Sometimes it's folding, apparently. It's kind of correct. No, wait, hold on. No, it's never folding here, but sorry, this is when you're folding. Yeah, so it might just mix a call once in a while, like 60% of the time. Like King 7, it's strong enough as a 2 pair to basically raise to a certain size, like 40, and if you simplify, basically 100% of the time. What are you folding out? Some of these hands that have basically no equity, 10-4 suited, 10 deuce suited, right? Even these, even some of these hands that people love pre-flop and kind of like fall in love with, Jack 9 offsuit, and like Queen 9 offsuit, you know, Ace Deuce offsuit, you know, you just fold these hands a lot of the time. But like now, why do we, let's say, if we look and find some outliers, right? Why do we raise with 6-4 suited?
That's what I was getting to before,
Yeah, and I'm touching on that now
Yeah.
too, right? So why do we raise with 6-4 suited? Anyone have any guesses?
Odds of hitting a 5. No?
A 5? Okay.
Well,
That's-
we've got 2 cards still to count, so
You're also checking to see if the guy's for real.
the odds are high for doing that.
Really has a better, kings are better.
Yeah. It's kind of all of the above there. You're still six high, right? So you have no showdown value whatsoever. So in order to defend your range, to potentially win the pot and all these other things, then you have to kind of think ahead about this hand. There are still 2 cards to come. Oz is right. You could hit a 5, making the nut straight, right? And you could have, if you're suited and you have the, let's say here, the spade variant, a spade could come out, and then if you check raise, then you can still like continue to barrel and represent a very strong hand. But then, even though you have 6 high, you're still mixing a lot of these bluff hands with some of your stronger hands. Because again, remember, King 7 likes to check raise here, 7s like to check raise here, and some other 2 pairs like 7-3 suited, they like to check raise here. So in order to make money when you do have these hands, you want to be able to find bluffs to take the same line of action as well, so that when people see what you have and they know you are capable of bluffing now, they will call you a little bit lighter, so that when you do have these strong pocket 7 hands, set of 7 hands, then you'll get paid. So that's why bluffing is not something you would avoid entirely. It is something that you have to incorporate into your range strategy in order to be more profitable as a poker player. Okay, any questions about that? I don't need to go any further because I think we got the general gist of what I want to try to accomplish here, but we'll go more in depth for next week. Yes?
It's kind of cool to see there's like this one mathematical formula.
Yeah, yeah.
So my question is like, in general, like, is this like illegal? Like someone just using this off like online poker and like running AI against this, or is this like totally allowed? Or
So when you're playing in hands and whatever, you're not supposed to have this open. It's like, it's hard to enforce, but it's illegal to be doing this. And it's also illegal to be, there was a whole case recently with GTO Poker and stuff like that. You can't ask people about hands while you're in a hand either, or else like you'll get banned essentially. So
like we say online poker.
Online poker, same thing. You're not actually supposed to be having this open while, because then you'll just like quickly take that 10 seconds or 20 seconds or whatever, and then just figure out what is the best play to make, right?
Happens all the time.
It happens more than you think, but you're not supposed to.
Not in those states.
Yeah, you're not supposed to be doing that.
Just be on front.
This is like a tool for you to train off the table.
Yeah.
For you to just like improve your gameplay, and then memorize some of these things, understand the heuristics of some other things, and then when you're competing, then you take all those skills, and then you're just like focused on playing your best poker when the time comes. Yeah. So, but to your point, no, it's completely illegal to do it while you're playing. Yeah.
You can't use your phones anymore and or even like have them on the table.
You can put the glasses on.
Yeah. Any
Yeah.
other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Can we look at the big blinds range pre-flop?
The big blinds range 3 flop.
So this is my question.
Okay.
You guys we're about to start a tournament? Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if I'm in the big blind with 80 bigs in like half an hour from now,
Yeah.
and the button raises to 2.3,
Yeah.
and I have Jack 4 off,
And you have Jack 4 off. Yes.
should I call?
So if it were me, I'd call. Right? If
Should
it
I
were
call? I'm not you.
and if it were you, maybe. The question, the answer is totally maybe, because maybe you are playing against somebody who is super aggressive and you've noticed they played every single hand leading up to that point, right? Then you probably want to call, because if you hit like a jack pair, you're probably good a lot of the time, right? If you hit even like a trip fours or something like that, you are going to print
But then
money
why wouldn't I
against
call with Jack 3 if I follow that logic?
So if you, why wouldn't you? Well, again, we talked about how like in solver land, they've just determined that as a baseline, as a reference graph, that or reference chart rather, this is like the optimal way of playing in this particular configuration. So if you're an aggressive player, you totally could open up your range to be 100% of the entire range. That's totally up to you, right? So, but based on solver world, they're saying that is not recommended.
I think I would fold Jack 4. Am I making a mistake?
If you are to play millions of hands against that person, and you decide to do that, then you are it's saying that every time you have Jack 4 off against that opponent, you are losing EV by not calling in that spot. That's what it means. But again, like we talked about,
If they
Yeah.
are playing GTO, if they're exploiting me, how am I losing EV?
if
What am I
they're-
losing EV to?
you're if they are playing GTO as well, right?
Are they? Is someone
Well,
gonna be playing GTO?
that's hard to tell. You don't know necessarily,
I
and
have
that's
a suspicion they aren't.
if you suspect they aren't,
I'm
then
talking about right here, this tournament, in half an hour.
Yeah. If you suspect they are not playing GTO, then you should find the exploitative play as much as possible. Which means that if, again, it now narrows down to like how they are as a player, and then you just have to find out their patterns, their leaks, and then play accordingly to them. So it's
Okay.
all dependent on that.
So like Jack 5 off, 100% call, right?
Well, let's see. If like in this case, like, so let's click this for a second. Jack 4, it says it wants to fold 23.5, or let's just say 24% of the time, and it wants to call 77% of the time. Again, you have to mix these strategies, and again, it also depends on who you're playing against.
Okay.
Jack 5 off, and it's saying you want to call 100% of the time. So,
And what's the expected value of that call?
if you want to look at that, then you can look here, and then so strategy plus EV, it's saying that if you have Jack 5 and you're calling with this hand, then a call you're making 0.02 like chips or like dollars or whatever you're playing for. Every time you make this call against a player that is again in the up button, also playing GTO, also raising
Is
up that size.
is
and
that
everything.
0.02, is that on this street, or is that over the course of the hand?
This is this street.
So, for me to realize that EV, do I have to play this hand GTO on the flop, turn, and river?
Yes, exactly.
But Vincent, I haven't studied Jack 5 on the flop.
You're right.
There's so many flops and so many turns.
You're right, and that's why it's like
So should I call with it pre-flop, or should I just fold it?
So again, it just like depends on like who you're playing against.
You're on the big blind, and it might be, it's a 2.3 range, right? So you're already in for one, there you go, the old, well, I'm in for one.
Yeah, I mean, well,
Plus you may be,
so
Bring it
generally speaking, blind versus blind, or like blind versus blind, small blind versus big blind. But then if you notice, like you're the last to act, button raises, they have a very wide range because they're in position, and you notice small blind folds, and it's technically like almost blind for blind. Then you want to call with a very, very wide range, generally speaking, because they have a very, very wide range. And so then you can just start to navigate and try to play post flop. I mean, so yeah, like the simple answer, I would say, is like you generally want to be calling against most player types. And again, you could, even if you call and you're just giving up an extra, because you already have the big blind and your ante in, you're just calling an extra 1.3 to just to make this call. And let's say the button player is a very tight player, then when they continue to bet on this flop, then you didn't hit anything, you just fold. It's not a problem.
Free call gets value.
At that point.
Yeah, and that's why you'll call.
Yes, that's why it's considered a plus
Post
EV.
flop, you're gonna watch what the other.
Right, and it's like saying too, it's like you should not be raised, like 3-betting this, you should not be go raising all in, because those are kind of easy plays with this particular hand. Right?
Plus, if you're folding, you know, somebody open bets out of the button, and you're a big blind, the small blind, and you're seeing you fold the big blind to a 1.3 raise. That's probably exploited algorithm.
If you want to figure out how to play against the average player, maybe here, maybe at the casino, maybe at a WSOP event or whatever, then it's usually better to not go into a session or a game assuming people are going to do certain things unless you have some kind of history with that person. You want to kind of default to these strategies and then just like piercingly observe and watch how they play and just try to follow along, figure out the patterns, and then just exploit accordingly. That's generally the best heuristic to navigate these situations.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway.
Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
It started and then you guys are in there.
Well,